Just so you know, we have to do this every time just to make sure. Kent's the historian. I'm the spokesperson, so to speak. That unfortunately, his voice is going. So I will speak in the first person as if I'm responsible. I just want you to know up front, I'm not. I didn't do anything except look it over and say, that's good. So with that, we always want to recognize that this wouldn't be possible if it weren't for the Dollamore Foundation. This is part of the Creative Arts Alliance. Obviously also, for those of you who are members of the Historical Society, you are the reason that we're doing this. Tonight, we're going to do Lake City in 1950. Now, I think most of you will recognize most of the people, even if you weren't here in 1950. So with that, we want to start out. We thank Karen Epps, for the fact that she introduced us last time, said, let's give a little context. And the context is, this is what was happening in 1950. These were the top 10 records for that period of time. There were actually 2 lists of top 10 records for that year. I don't really understand.
Not records, movies, boy.
Oh, I'm sorry, this is the movie. Okay. Now, I remember, personally, King Solomon's Mine, Cinderella, Annie Get Your Gun, Winchester 73, Fancy Pants. Those were the only ones I remember. I don't know about the rest of you.
But Cinderella took in half of what the total number of the first 10 movies.
And notice that number. What was it? What came out this past weekend? The movie that just was introduced, and it had $40 million opening weekend. And so,
Now we're talking about the 1950.
Talking about a different world when it comes to money.
More. Okay.
Okay,
Now
top 10 songs.
Now your songs.
And I do not remember the Fat Man. I remember Fast Domino. But please, personally, I only remember a few of these. Mona Lisa, it's still being played. Tennessee Waltz,
Good Night, Irene.
Where? We had put another nickel in by Teresa Brewer, and I Can Dream, Can't I? And My Foolish Heart. Those I remember personally. You probably have a different list of the ones that you remember if you were here. Nevertheless, those were the top songs of 1950. And this is what we looked like. Well, not we.
Them old folks.
This is what we thought we ought to look like. I never was a Cary Grant type. And these were our cars. Oh man. This must have been about the last year, one of the last years for Studebaker. Yeah, it didn't last that much longer, but that was a interesting looking car. Even the Ford had copied it to a certain extent.
That Oldsmobile looks like the folks eyelashes,
It reminds me of The Godfather, and Sonny driving through that toll booth.
All right, let's get to the problem now,
Yeah.
Jamie.
Okay. These are the list of characters. We see Willie Cook is up there again. He's the mayor, along with Lannis Poston, Mims Merritt, Cecil Floyd, Leroy Benton, Raymond Askins, and Arthur Anderson. Now, notice it said down at the bottom that Florence County State House of Representative delegation introduced a bill to give Lake City councilmen 4-year terms instead of 2. So what is it now, 4 at this time? 4. So that goes back to , and here you see the school board trustees Dr. Evans, yep, Mr. Whitlock, Joe Duke, Cecil Floyd, and Jay Acidi. All right.
Here's the teacher.
The faculty. Coach Schuler, Olin Powell, and Schuyler, excuse me. And let's see, who else in there? Most of us, I mean,
Most of them teachers we told.
they hung around for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay? These were the seniors and the class officers. Jimmy Barkowitz, Isla Louise Price, Catherine Elizabeth Lackey, and Ruby Jewel Floyd.
Okay.
All right, more senior class pictures. I think I was, let's see, I would have been about 8 or 9 at this point. So these people were so old. You know, I knew them if they went to church with me, but that's about the only way I would have known them back then. And here we see another bunch.
Okay.
And another bunch. Okay. I tell you, Barbara Jennings looked the same all her life. She always had that same bearing.
Charles Kelly.
Yeah, that's old Charles M.
Yeah.
Okay. That's Jack Matthews. It says Joseph. Joe Matthews, excuse me. Yeah, his brother was Jack. Now, for some reason, Janie McCutcheon got mentioned twice. Okay. Okay. And more. Ronald Hart. Some of these I remember slightly, but I can't tell you why I remember them. You know, the faces are so familiar, but I can't tell you anything about them. Eleanor Williams. She's written an interesting book about her family, the Williams family. It's in the Historical Society Library. It's worth a read if you really want to understand some of Lake City's history. Girls basketball team. I got to tell you, I always thought Lake City produced some of the prettiest girls anywhere. Still think that. I think in 1950, the girls were still playing half court.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, they got, geez. And the boys basketball team. A bunch. And the band. Mr. Strain.
That thing looked like Halloween. It was an orange and black uniform. It wasn't gold, it was orange.
There he is, standing next to Emmett Patrick. Yep.
That's Asbury Williams, J.P. Matthews. That's in the Floyd, right? Yeah. Okay. All right.
And the football team. Man, that's a rough-looking bunch. Okay. This Lake City is going through a kind of a building craze phase in 1950. And last few times they've been installing parking meters. And now they finally got enough money out of them, they can buy lights. So they're gonna put them on Main and Ackline. I mean, they're really upgrading things. $3,000, big expenditure. $870 taken out of the parking meter fund. So, 2,400 feet is approximately half a mile is my math. If somebody got a better math, correct me. But when those trains are traveling fast, that doesn't seem very far. Nevertheless, down at the bottom, any of you remember, it says another improvement along the tracks is when they changed the crossing. They said it was where Dixon's Mill and Godwin Street is, and they moved it down to Fairview. Do you remember it being anywhere other than Fairview? Anyway, I don't, but. And this was the high school at the time. If you look at it, you can see it had a baseball field behind it and a football field behind it as well. You can see the gym on the left there, and behind it was the ag building. That's Miss Carter's house on the bottom right hand. I'm not sure.
This is the Johnson house, William Johnson.
That's Johnson.
Henry Johnson's father.
And Janet Floyd's grandmother was in this.
And that's Howard's house, Howard Floyd's house. Okay, the McDaniel house.
You can see all the way up at the top, that was the King house, right on the other side. Yep, that's the King house. And I can't recall exactly who owned that little stucco house that was right in front of it.
Okay. All right.
Okay. You can see that given where the ballpark was, it caused a problem. The residents in the neighborhood were not exactly thrilled to have crowds at night cheering for their team. And so they got an injunction to prevent the baseball park from using the ballpark for semi-pro or professional teams. This was 1950, before the truckers got here. So they had the big meeting where they're trying to decide how to respond to the injunction and how to satisfy the neighbors. And they were going to provide police protection outside of the park, close the gate at the back of the park, install toilet facilities, increase the height of the ball, keep the balls out of the neighbors' yards.
It went to the state Supreme Court. Okay?
All the way to the Supreme Court.
Yes. All right. We might let you know something next time.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
Scientific colors.
Yeah, this is, until Kemp pointed it out, I didn't realize that school was actually burned down, almost.
It burned down in 1936, and only the walls were standing. Mr. Harry Whitlock lived down the street on Williamsburg Avenue, and he looked. He was going to school that morning. Well, it was early morning, and he didn't see anything but a flame shooting out from the high school. And then they came up with a scientific study of color.
When they rebuilt it, notice the colors. If it was north facing, some tone of yellow. If it's eastern, it's green. Though the auditorium was light shade of green. That was be darned if I remember the colors of the rooms.
I don't remember any of it.
Yeah, just the blood on the wall is all I remember. Okay. And we seem to have had a rabies problem. What does it say? 65 people had to take rabies treatment.
And you had to get them in your stomach.
And it was very painful at that time. And notice that according to them, there were quite a few people that took it as a preventative measure because they didn't know if they had been bitten by a rabid dog or not.
50 dogs were destroyed.
I mean, the police department must have been really busy because we didn't have an animal control bureau at that time. So it was the police out there collecting these dogs and killing them. Okay. Oh, yeah. The class play. I actually found this. I didn't tell you. 1 Minute to 12 was a comedy that was put on, and you can see who is in it. The comedy was about a young boy who could not resist women. And he ended up having proposed to 4 different women. And it's all about how he tried to get out of that. So I'm sure.
This is the way it was written. Ronald Tart and Charles Kelly. Now, I'm not picking.
Yeah, we don't know who played which
I'm not
roles.
picking there. Funeral home.
Yes. The truck here hides a sign. You can see over the back of the truck.
Right here.
This is where the lofts are now.
This is where it.
Okay? It had been a bank originally, but when the bank closed, Van Epps made it a funeral home. And he
stored
later.
He stored his caskets on John Street.
He moved to Thomas Street, which is the funeral home. That building is still there.
And Earl Holloway was an embalmer. You believe that?
It's a perfect job for him because the corpse didn't care how long it took. Who remembers where Menendez 5 and Dime was? It says it was in the old Stewart Grocery and Hardware. And it says it was on West Main. But having a little difficulty remembering and placing that. I'm not sure how long the store stayed open. But it's on West Main Street, that's all I know. Okay? Smiley's Ice Cream Bar. Surely I would have remembered that, but I don't. Does anybody remember where it was?
Yeah.
Where?
I think it was about 2 doors down from Strickland's Jewelers.
Toward the railroad track or toward the railroad track? The other way. So it was right next to Woodrow Collins feed and seed store.
No. On the East Main Street.
Oh, East Main Street.
East
sorry.
Main Street.
East Main Street. Oh, Collins Department Store.
Yeah.
Okay.
He opened it up in April, and then he sold it in August to one of the employees. His name was Duncan, and he owned Smiley's Termites. Eddie Epps bought Smiley's Termites from Mr. Smiley.
Okay.
got a new store.
This is Ep Swenson. And it was right next door to M&D Drug.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I think it's in the part where they now actually have the pharmacy. They remodeled and opened that up, but that was originally two different buildings. And Epson Swenson was right
And I
next to it.
think Clay said that his dad fell in love with Miss Sybil during the Army, during the war. And he was brought down, and he was a Yankee from South Dakota.
Okay. This is where currently Church and Main Street, and we have the little county park.
It's right here.
And this is Richfield Service Station, Gamble Oil Company,
Right across the street.
from Lannis Poston.
Yeah. Okay, and this is the bee market.
Yep.
And it was Gamble Oil Company. And later on,
And it opened in 1950. Yep. Seemed to me like it had always been there. In the decade from 40 to 50, Lake City doubled its population. It seems like we hadn't budged too much since then. We got to 5,000. We tried to stay there. I guess it's sort of like watching your figure. Try to get the numbers.
Papico,
Yeah.
and Scranton, Oglala, and Johnsonville also increased in their population.
And some of them more than doubled. Scranton increased from 155 to 593. So that's about 4 times, if not 5. So the whole county was experiencing a lot of growth at that time. Okay. We've got the swimming pool. Now they're going to put a playground next to it. So this was, you can see the equipment that they had, jungle gym and so forth, swing, seesaw, slides, was placed next door to it.
Then you had the tennis courts. Miss Carl Hyman was on the committee in 1935. The playground was where Miss Carl Hyman lived, or where I live. The playground was they called it in the Pines back then.
Okay.
The Klan.
Oh, big deal. However, it's kind of hard to tell how many, if any, were from Lake City, because this is the parade that came north, coming south into Lake City from somewhere up north. Could have been on the edge of town for all I know, but when they came into town on 52, they went through the neighborhood. Apparently, there was a good deal of agitation at that time. And so you can see that, and they went through the town, they went through the neighborhood, went through the town, and then headed on out to King Street. But 500 people wearing their regalia.
150 cars. So,
The thing is that they weren't wearing their mask.
yeah.
So at this point, a lot of them are recognized,
And
obviously.
right here, they went through the black residence, which would have been, say, Ninth Street in that area.
In the second paragraph, several women were noticed I believe that word was probably costumed. So
We spelled like it's
that's the way they wrote it.
New parking.
Again, parking.
We are going to finish up our parking tonight. But we had the space hogs.
But I think this was actually a pretty good thing where they basically created boxes along the street. So whenever you park, you can look out the driver's side and tell that you're inside the box inside the line. So, okay. Boy Scouts go to Valley Forge. And these are the ones that went. And I tell you, it must have been a heck of a trip. They stopped and they were apparently, it says, were highlighted by addresses by President Eisenhower. That was in 1950. He won the election in 50, right?
49, yeah. He was running for president 1950.
Okay. Well, he has a house and a farm that's right there at Gettysburg, not all that far from Valley Forge, so. Okay.
How about that?
Do you remember these things? Driving through the town,
It was only
that
was a
smoke
Jeep.
coming out.
It was a Jeep, and smog would just be rolling out the back.
Lord only knows what they had in it. If they really had DDT, every one of us ought to have brain damage. Well, excuse me, I hadn't thought about that.
You did, Jamie.
Maybe that's an indication. Oh, here we are parking again. In this one, they're also really fussing about people blocking passageways between buildings, in the parking. So it's not just on the streets. They're really getting serious about it, particularly given that we're in tobacco season when there are swarms of people in town. Everything was crowded. All parking spaces were taken. So navigation could be a problem. So, to have something to do in the summer, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, free movies. And this is at the swimming pool. Mr. McLawhorn and Charles Ford were the officers for the Junior Chamber of Commerce. I don't remember Charles
As
Ford.
far as Rogers ran the projector.
And then they're doing it at the pool. This is the next week. They're talking about turning it into something like a drive-in movie.
It's behind the bathhouse, the screen wall.
Yep, and Forrest Rogers apparently built all the structures that were necessary to show the film at that time. Okay.
Kindergarten.
This is Miss Fleetwood Epps and Edwin Jones operating a kindergarten. Ms. Epps at this time lived on William Street, and so I assume that's where the kindergarten was. Still trying to teach the same kids the same thing. Music appreciation, though, that's a little different. And every day, oh man, okay.
Miss Fleetwood was Connie's mother. Okay, Jamie.
A traumatic experience was Oscar Baldwin's death. It's a story of people of that era might know. My mother and father lived with the Baldwins for a while when they first came to town, and my mother particularly always stayed close to them. So it was real trauma, and it's almost like a family thing in many ways. But Mr. Baldwin was not faultless. This is one of those things that it's a true tragedy. I'll take a few minutes just to run through it for you, because there was a man named Herbert what's his, Bowles. Everybody called him Red because he was tall, thin, had red hair, red complexion, Red Bowles. Red Bowles grew up around Cades, White Oak community, Cades out there in that area. He was a farmer until he moved to Lake City in about 1945. And he had a really young wife that apparently they had a few domestic disputes. And it went before Mr. Baldwin, who was a city magistrate at the time. And Mr. Baldwin sided with the wife. And that didn't sit well with Red. Not long after the case was heard, she left. Didn't tell him, just left in the middle of the night, disappeared. Well, Red got really mad and upset. He found Mr. Baldwin in the old Bowen brick warehouse. And he accosted him and accused him of asking where his wife was. And when Oscar Baldwin said he didn't know, things got out of hand. Police were called, charges were pressed, Bowles went before the court. Case was dismissed. He didn't really think anything happened. Just a little after that, though, Red was on a corner. There was a hot dog stand on Saul Street. Mr. Baldwin comes up, pulls a pistol, points it at him, and clicks. Well, he's hauled to court, charged with attempted murder. But he said it was never loaded, so it couldn't be attempted murder. They dismissed it. Just a couple of months later, we're into the tobacco season. Now, Oscar Baldwin lived about where Karen's office is right now. And the New Home warehouse was literally right across the street. It's where the hardware store is now. Mr. Baldwin's in the warehouse talking to the manager when he sees Red come in. Now, Red had worked there in the afternoons on an evening shift during tobacco season. And supposedly he'd come to see if they wanted him. He went in to get water. Mr. Baldwin saw him, though, and felt threatened. So he asked the office manager if he had a gun. The office manager says no. Mr. Baldwin called the police. The police officer came. First thing Mr. Baldwin tried to do was borrow his gun. The policeman wouldn't loan it to him, so he tried to buy it. Well, when he refused again, Mr. Baldwin got in a police car with a policeman and drove to the police station where he attempted again to buy a gun. Apparently it didn't work. He must have walked home because it wasn't that much later whenever he approached Red. Red by this time is outside on the street. He's talking to a couple of people. He walks up to Red and he's got a gun and he says, "Are you looking for me?" Now Red said no. But he lunged at Oscar. Oscar fired. It shattered Red's left arm. But Red, Mr. Baldwin, I forget what 65 or something like that, paunchy, only one eye. He'd lost it in an accident just a few years before. Red put him down real quick. But Mr. Baldwin still got the gun. He fires one more shot, and one of the two guys that Red was talking to grabbed the gun, took it from him. Well, whenever Mr. Baldwin lost the gun, Red got up, walked across the street to his car, and got his gun. Oscar runs inside the warehouse, trying to hide. Unfortunately, where he chose to hide ended up sort of like a blind alley. Red found him. And Red is standing there, looking at him, and he shoots him. And it hits him in the left side. It knocks him down. He's on his stomach. Red shoots him again. Just a little while later, the policemen are there. They catch Red with a gun in his hand, standing over Oscar Baldwin. And the police chief said that he knelt beside Oscar, and Oscar said, "He's killed me," and died. Red Bowles was hauled off to the hospital because of his arm, put in jail for a little while, but the charges were dismissed. It was claimed self-defense. And so, I have to tell you, Mrs. Baldwin did not live long after that. Not long after that, Red died. Red did not live more than 2 years after that incident. So, I can still remember my dad talking about Red being on the street. But that's one of those tragic tales that small towns have. More than you wanted to know, but nevertheless you got it. This is the year that the Baptists built the education building. I remember as a child, I was excited. It had a library in it. It had from nursery to about 6th grade in it, 2 floors, really new, really nice. Really enjoyed it. C.J. Evans built it, was the contractor and built it. The site was given by Ms. Bowen.
That's Woody's grandmother.
$50,000. Okay. Now, is this Roper?
This is Mr. Roy Floyd.
Is it?
Charles Tomlinson.
Yep.
And then Mr. Rogers. And I think this is a guy that was a janitor at the State Bank. His name was Wallace.
Now, Roy Floyd had purchased this and gone into business originally with Dr. Evans and Mr. Baxley from Dillon. But Mr. Floyd, as I recall, had a brother from Atlanta that ran a pharmacy. And so that's how he got into the business. He was more like a store manager. I'm not sure when Slew Askins became the pharmacist.
I think he came in when Mr. Roper came.
Okay.
Okay.
Ed Roper bought him out in 1950. This is the black school, 700 pupils in the black school. I am not sure what grades, if that's all grades, though I'm not really sure of that. But they had 32 boys on the football team in uniform. That's a pretty big squad. You can see they played Marion, Loris High, I don't know Dennis High, where that would have been, Whitmore, Dillon High, and homecoming was at Lakeview.
And they would have a homecoming parade about the size of a Christmas parade. They would invite all the schools to come. Y'all remember the Carver High School homecoming parade. They would start at Carver School and go down Main Street.
Jesse James, Hatcher's Barbershop. It's Hatchell. Didn't catch that. I'm sorry, Hatchell's Barbershop. Hatchell's Barbershop was on Ackline Street. It was right next to, was it the Mayflower
Mayflower.
restaurant?
Bowling Sassy now.
Yep. And Mr. Hatchell, I remember J.C. Lynch used to talk about Mr. Hatchell, and so Mr. Hatchell in his last years, had Parkinson's, and he was still barbering. And he was still using a straight razor, to shave people and clean up their necks. He used to tell all kinds of tales about that. And then H.S. McGee buys the hotel barbershop, where the hotel barbershop was.
At the hotel barbershop where DJ was.
Yeah,
DJ Lynch was.
it's right next to 7
Yeah.
today. But Mr. Driggers bought it, owned it. McGee bought it. Mr. Driggers hung around. Because Mr. Driggers, as I recall, also had a watch repair business in there. So, okay.
You believe Zeke Ward running for city council?
Anybody that played football in Lake City in that era knew Zeke Ward only too well. Zeke, no, I'm not going to say anything. My mama told me.
Lake City was building back in the 50s.
Look at all of this building activity. I mean, it was moving. The Baptist Church, the service station that we talked about already, Lake City Seafood, I'm sure that's the one on Ackline. Then you've got newcomer is Morris Funeral Home. Is that in the Van Epps?
That was where Tammy Cockfield's place is now.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a florist on Church Street. That would be next door to Dr. Webb, I think. And the Hatchery and Feed on Saul Street, remodeling. Webb's Furniture, I think, was on Ackline, right? Anybody recall?
Which furniture?
And Edie has repainted the fertilizer site.
Hoyt Carter's house, that would be Sarah and Johnny McDaniel's house now. The Cromers
Yep.
down the street.
All these people moving out
Yeah.
to the east of Lake City at that time. On William Street, Hendrick Street.
Lance Poston's house is where Larry Reddick, Paula,
Yeah.
house is.
You can see there was a lot of activity at that period of time.
Yeah.
Lake City was still
Got still
Cresting.
more,
still growing.
you know. I wish we had that today, you know. I mean,
Okay, television. Do you remember your first television? I remember being a paper boy. I'd have to go collect papers, and I always knew which families had a TV. And I'd stand at the door hoping they didn't have change. So it'd take time, and I could watch what was on the screen.
you notice on Sunday morning, what time did it start? 12:15. Wonder why. Church service was over at 12. And then lights out, 11:30. Got the Gabby Hayes show.
And the Philco Playhouse, so some of those I remember, even from that era, because they hung over for quite a while. Like the Fred Waring show lasted quite a long time. The first people in Lake City to have television, at least according to the newspapers' reports, were Exum Hennett and W.W. Collins. Picked up Murray McClendon and Paul Singletary also. The pioneers, the television pioneers of Lake City.
We actually have these at the Historical Society, if y'all want to come and look and see. Okay, 1948 and 49 TVs.
See how it grew? Oh, what a fun event this must have been. All the town celebrities fighting a gorilla. As best I can make out from the article, that really was an ape. Not just some guy that they called an ape.
Charlie Walker was going to fight the gorilla.
Oh, look at all of those. It seemed like everybody in town had to get in the ring with him. Walter Wells is probably the only one that stood a chance. But I mean, look at that. The policeman, the mayor, council people. I mean, they're crazy.
Okay. The daughters of the Revolution, American Revolution, the DAR. And these were the ladies of the town.
You know, I recognize a lot of the names, but I'm not sure I can put them to the right faces. Some of them I can. Like
That's Miss Margaret Carter. Miss Laird. That's Miss Annie Carolyn's mother, Annie Carolyn Whitlock. That's Miss Sauce. Miss Singletary. I think that's Miss Murray McClendon. But these were the ladies of the town back in 1950. Okay.
Okay. More on the Carver High School, I think, it wasn't called Carver at that time, was it? Was it just a colored school? It wasn't called Carver at this time, was it?
No, it was called the Lake City Colored School. That's how Mr. Matthew Brown has a diploma, and he has the Lake City Colored School on it. Later on, it was called Carver. But you had Roy Johnson on the football team, Luke Dix, Paul Graham, Clyde Brown.
Remember, this is the year that they had 32 who went out for football out of this school. They had a big squad. Lost one game to Conway, 6-0.
The Northeastern Athletic Association. Okay.
Yep.
I found a picture. I found a picture today.
All right. Interesting.
Scranton had a
beauty contest.
beauty contest.
Yeah.
And
Annual thing.
Elaine Weatherford was in my class, and she was a good-looking woman. She married June Raines, which was the baseball coach at Carolina. And then we have the two boys.
The Rollins children. And apparently Miss Rollins walked next door, left these two alone. When she comes back, there's rat poison all over the floor and they're playing in it. Now, if any of you know George Rollins, that probably explains him. I don't know how do you pump stuff out of somebody's stomach? I know they do it, but particularly little kids. Because 1950, they were what? George was what, 3 years old?
4 or 5. Yeah, George was 5.
Something like that.
And Jamie might have been 3, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. This is an older picture.
I have heard that sodium fluoride will stunt your growth. So, okay. New elections. This is in December, end of the year. So we've got the new officials, Willie Cook again, Raymond Askins, running the fire department, John Grimsley, police department, Ed Bowen, city streets, Louis Cook, water department, DC Dr. G.C. Rogers, health department, Boyd Nettles, mayor pro tem. G.R. Anderson still on the board. Ms. George Duke was city clerk. Mr. Rittenbaker, assistant clerk. Chief Bridges still the chief of police. Walter Moody, fire chief. Dr. Whitehead, Board of Health. Forrest Rogers, superintendent of water. Mr. Covington, superintendent of streets. And Mr. Conyers, road patrol. Victor Liley recommended to serve as the health department. And so you see, these are the police that Oscar Baldwin called.
There was 6 police in Lake City at the time, or 7, counting the chief. Okay.
Okay. Isn't this just, this story didn't sound right to me, but what I figured out was they were having the Christmas parade down Main Street, and the Atlantic Coastline decided they wanted to be a part of it. And so they drove their train right through the parade. They stopped with the caboose at Main Street and just plain stopped. Then they backed up and fiddled around before moving on. And so it took quite a while before they got rid of the train. So we had a 2-part parade that year.
Okay. You know, Halloween is Sunday. And I'm afraid that we have amongst us a new star. Eugene. He's going to tell us a little story about, if I can pull it in there full screen, about some young man. It's not long. Here we go.
Our story begins here, at this spot. This dilapidated old house sits on the same spot that the Sturgeon Hotel did in 1902. This was the scene of one of those tragedies that people talk about for years and years. Dilapidated, weather-beaten old house sits on the same spot where the Sturgeon Hotel was located at the turn of the century. The Sturgeon Hotel was built before there were any brick buildings, so if you can imagine it, there were no buildings between it and the railroad track. Indeed, you can see it clearly from the train depot where travelers arrived in our town. There was a welcoming garden in front designed to catch the eye of those travelers. Unfortunately for its owners, an act of kindness soon became the cause of nightmares and led to the abandonment of the hotel and also to the building that replaced it. In 1902, Lake City was on the cusp of becoming a boomtown. Since the railroad had arrived in 1854, the town had slowly become an important stop for the trains as they loaded up with agricultural products for northern markets. They were also delivering more and more goods to Lake City, such as mules, agricultural implements, and goods for the new merchants in town. The town itself consisted of around 300 people, 3 hotels, 3 mule stables, and more than half a dozen mercantile stores. Its main street was divided into East and West Main by a double set of railroad tracks with switches which allowed trains to pull onto sidings. With a continuous stream of trains passing through the town, the sidings allowed rail cars to load and unload without requiring the next train to wait. If you stood on the railroad tracks at Main Street, facing west, the first two-story wooden building on the south side of the street was the Mercantile Emporium of Henry Nachman. Henry was a Jewish immigrant from a country that no longer existed, as Galicia had been absorbed by Austria just a few years prior. Henry had been a merchant in Lake City since 1890, was well established, and was a prominent and respected businessman. At 39 years of age, he was the father of 5 children by 2 wives. His first wife had died just 3 years earlier. His oldest child, Joseph, had just turned 17 and had begun clerking in his father's store. On the night of November 22nd, 1902, a Saturday night, Joseph left his father's store at around 8 p.m. and instead of heading home, turned toward the train tracks. There was a train on the siding. Jacob couldn't resist the temptation to climb on top of the caboose and jump from car to car. As he was playing this dangerous game, the train started moving back to the main track. Jacob, instead of dismounting, kept moving toward the engine. Starting at the back of the train, he jumped from boxcar to boxcar. As he began to jump from the 6th to the 7th, either he misjudged his jump or the train lurched and threw him off balance. The result was he fell into the gap and onto the rail, half of him still under the train. 6 cars, that's 24 wheels, rolled over him, crushing his pelvis, spine, and reducing his intestinal organs to mush. Astonishingly, he lived through this horrible incident, and his cries quickly brought people to his side. Dr. Williams' office was just steps away, and he was called to help. Under his supervision, several men lifted Jacob, who was still conscious, with his 2 halves held together only by skin. Mr. Surgeon, who was also at the scene, suggested they carry him to his hotel, only 50 feet or so from the track. They put Jacob in one of the guest rooms, where he remained conscious and lucid as he recounted the events of the night. At 11 o'clock, after 3 agonizing hours, Jacob called for his mother and died. Sturgeon's Hotel was both home and hotel to the Sturgeon family. After that night, it was never the same. Guests avoided it, claiming it was haunted by cries of "Mama, Mama." It wasn't long before the Sturgeons decided to sell the building to Van Epps, the local undertaker. Although not superstitious, Mr. Epps thought he had made a bargain as he tore down the hotel and built a funeral home. Yet it didn't turn out to be such a great deal after all. Bereaved families, as they watched over the body of their loved ones, soon began saying that they were hearing a boy's voice crying for his mother, which added to their grief and their stress. Mr. Epps had to move his undertaking business to another location. Today, the old funeral home still stands, abandoned, and haunted by a young man's plea for his mother, a woman who had died 3 years earlier. It's heartbreaking to think that he was not reunited with her at his death, and that this is the reason you can still hear his cry late at night as trains are passing by. Jacob's body was taken to Charleston, where it was buried next to his mother's grave. Yet it seems he is still seeking her.
Actually, a true story, except for Jamie added a little twist to it. But Joseph Nachman was about 17-year-old. Thank you all for coming. It's been great.